I want to talk about why you, yes you, should play Dark Souls. For those of you unfamiliar, Dark Souls, as well as its blood brother games Demon's Souls, Bloodborne, and Sekiro Shadows Die Twice, are a series of video games noted for their particular difficulty and emphasis on intricate combat and learning from past mistakes. The series has drawn both praise and ire for its general difficulty and occasional jerky level design. While the series has a lot of fans of the details I've previously mentioned, this puts a lot of people off from playing the game. But I want to explain why, as someone who is as bad at video games as one can possibly be. I both love this series and think that absolutely everyone, and I mean everyone, can and should play the series. Not just in spite of its difficulty, but because of it. Okay, I know it's part of the community, but I think it's time we acknowledge that the Souls games and their Souls brother games are not actually that difficult, at least not in the traditional sense. Most video games are difficult because of bullshit. Now, when I say that word, I'm referring to a very specific event in a video game. It's when you die or somewhat fail, not because the game is designed to be difficult, but because the game is designed specifically to be impossible to overcome. It's every time in an action game you're facing down 10 enemies simultaneously, causing you to be overwhelmed. Or every time in a platformer when there's a boss with randomly generated platforms in the fight that spawn in a position where it makes it impossible to avoid an attack. It's not hard because it challenges your skill. It's that the game put you in a position where you couldn't win no matter how good you were. Dark Souls and Bloodborne, on the other hand, are difficult because they are obsessively fair. The boss's hitboxes are so insanely tight that things like the length of a weapon can make it more or less effective depending on the surroundings, letting you use the environment to your advantage, and even something as small as an animation making your head tilt can let you avoid attacks. The games never present you with a situation that you aren't prepared for, and the best example of this is with the boss progression of the original Dark Souls. The first boss of Dark Souls that you'll face is the Asylum Demon, and I promise you this boss is incredibly easy. I failed the drop attack you get the opportunity for at the beginning, accidentally consumed 3 of my 5 Estus flasks, and could not for the life of me get any distance from this thing, and even I beat it. Believe me, this is not the catching point of the game, you will get past it, but it introduces you to the standard style of Dark Souls bosses, namely that they're mostly giant monsters that clearly telegraph their attacks before swinging at you, which is the first point about the difficulty of Dark Souls being overrated. The game is fundamentally about fighting a boss until you memorize their 2 or 3 attacks, learning how to recognize their tells, and then figuring out how to avoid said attacks. From there you travel through some of the first exploratory areas of the game, before you encounter the Tauros demon. This, for me, was the first time I got stuck, and I would imagine similarly a sticking point for a lot of other people. The boss has enough HP that unless you're seriously over-leveled, you're going to be fighting it for long enough that you actually need to know how to play to beat him. He's big and strong enough that your shield will likely feel like a poor choice, forcing you to get out from behind it and learn the various rolling, backstep, and sidestep features of the game. And, if you want to cheese your way through this boss, you have to get really good at being aware of your surroundings and learning how to perform drop attacks. I tried a good 10 times before I beat this boss, and after it I felt exhausted, especially since every time you go to fight this boss, you have to run through an entire area to take it on. It's punishing, and I wouldn't be surprised if this was the cutoff point for a lot of players. Here's the thing. Next is the Bell Gargoyle. Well, gargoyles. The first gargoyle is a lot like a faster Tauros demon. It jumps around, swings its halberd, and breathes fire. The fight encourages you to try using items like the Golden Pine Resin, as it gives your weapon elemental damage. That's especially effective at damaging this boss. It makes you aware of the fact that enemies can even have elemental vulnerabilities. It helps you adjust to the game's speed increasing. Heck, while fighting, there's even a possibility you can cut its tail off and get a halberd, teaching you that that is a thing that can happen. But then the fight does something genius. A second gargoyle joins it at full HP. And I know what you're thinking, that is insane and the game hates me. Up until this point, the game has bullied you. It has used your natural instincts as a gamer against you. It rolls boulders and flaming barrels down staircases at you, hides enemies around blind corners, even puts pitfalls in your way knowing you'll fall into it. This game has belittled you, it's beaten up on you, and why shouldn't this be another occasion? But there's a difference. After panicking for a second, you realize you're not out of your depth here. You already know all of this guy's moves, and whereas other games have taught you that 2 enemies is twice as hard as a single, that isn't the case here. Quickly you figure out you can kite these guys to your front, where things like their fire breath aren't so dangerous. And unlike previous fights, all fighting styles get an opportunity to shine here. Shield users can parry to stun one gargoyle to focus on the other. Two-handed users can pancake them and use mobility to constantly gain superior positioning over the gargoyles. It helps especially that if you're properly leveled and using the resin, each of these gargoyles will only take about 6 hits to kill, which means it's teaching you that patience is valuable because every single hit means something. And this is a huge reason I started playing the games. Too many make bosses more difficult by just making bosses HP sponges, but Dark Souls prides itself on the fact that at absolute worst a boss will take you some 20 hits to defeat, and are averaging closer to 10. This means instead of fights being about painfully chipping away at bosses' health bars, every hit you land counts, and so you learn to play strategically. And it's in the gargoyle fight that you tap into something fundamental to the human experience that I'm astounded a digital product could capture. You aren't a super god. You aren't the chosen one blessed with divine strength, speed, and durability. No, you are a mere mortal. A human surviving, nay, winning, in the same way that your ancestors won against primal predators, by your skill and wit alone. And not skill is in some kind of stat. No, I mean the skill that you have built up over the past 20 hours of playing this game. And you'll win. It may take 2 or 3 tries, but you'll win. And as you climb that bell tower and you ring that bell, I promise you, you will cheer. By this point, you'll have learned all the tools you need to succeed. Now it's just a question of refining them. And you're only a fourth of the way through finishing the game. When discussing Dark Souls, the most important thing to understand is the game's relationship to death. In a typical game, death is a sign of failure. Typically, it's accompanied by some sort of punishment. The loss of items, progress, or experience are all common results of death. It is a tool for telling you you aren't good enough, and more importantly, that you shouldn't have even tried. The Souls games take a different approach to this. In Dark Souls, you only lose souls, an easy-to-replace resource you use to level up and purchase items. Otherwise, you lose no weapons or armor you've collected. None of your firebombs or arrows vanish unless you spent them, and the game even goes as far as to restore all of your Estus healing flasks. Sekiro Shadows Die Twice even lets you resurrect once whenever you die at no cost, as many times as you want, so long as you've dealt enough damage or died proper between each resurrection. It's not a punishment, it's simply you being informed that your stats, or more likely your skills and understanding of the enemy you are facing, or the path you are traveling along is not up to snuff. It brings the enemies back to square zero while letting you retain all of the experience and newly gained equipment from that run, and sends you off to try again. Your abilities fully filled up. There's a reason the player characters in 4 out of 5 of the major Souls games are cursed with immortality. Death in these games is valueless. It is not a sign of failure, it is a sign of new challenge being put forth. You're supposed to die like 20 times. The games are built so that dying never feels frustrating, just motivating. You start to feel like you're getting closer to winning, like you're just getting the hang of an area you're boss, and it's almost addicting to go back. To fix one last mistake, adjust one last movement, because you feel so close to overcoming the challenge. I think this is where people mistake these games for being impossible. Yeah, if you want to play these games like you would a standard ARPG where dying 3 or 4 times means you're bad at it, then yes, this game would seem impossible. But that's not this game. If you die 10, 20, hell 50 times, you're doing it right. To quote Grant Smith, the Citizen Kane of Dark Souls, as long as you accept that you are meant to die in these games, you're going to have a fun time with them. The only way you can fail in Dark Souls is giving up for good. And difficulty, contrary to what a lot of people seem to think, does not inherently make a video game more fun. But when it's well implemented, it fundamentally changes the experience of playing a game. By being more difficult, it trades out the passiveness and relaxation that you would generally get from a video game for instead promoting focus and engagement with the audience. Not to mention the longer-term satisfaction you get from beating a boss who is actually hard to beat and took work and effort. Let me tell you a story. I'm playing Shovel Knight, a fun little indie game that's on the harder side of normal, and I'm fighting the final boss, and God, this thing is just brutal. It's some 4 stages long, and if you die at any point, you have to replay the whole thing. It is a nightmare. I'm on the 4th or 5th attempt, 2nd stage through, and something happens. Just for a second, there was this sort of flow. Like the boss was throwing everything it had at me, but I was just perfectly reacting to it subconsciously. That lasted about 3 seconds before I died, but I was there. Cut to 2 years later, I'm playing another little game called Cuphead, and there's this boss. Well, bosses in Inkwell Isle. The first area, called Ribby and Croaks. Up until this point, the game has been mildly difficult, but pretty breezy. Breezy. Is that a word people still use? Ribby and Croaks are the first major roadblock you're meant to face on your journey, and judging by a lot of people's reactions to facing them for the first time...
That's horrible. That is no good. That is bad. That is bad. No. Ooh, this one is so hard. Holy shit.
Oh no! Damn it! I got super clutter. No, I didn't get any. I just stuck at that quarter still.
They're together.
Alright, that's fine. It's like Dark Souls. You just gotta learn the fights. Look at that. We almost won.
It's a pretty hard roadblock. I may have died a good 30 times against them, and even then I felt like by the end I won on luck, not skill. I hated it. They made me irrationally angry, and I didn't like that. I finished Carnic Agnation, got stuck on the following bosses, and dropped the game. 3 years later I returned to Cuphead, and I have a pretty easy time with most of the early bosses, but then I get to that damn riverboat. I enter the fight, and immediately something just seizes me, and I perfect it. Even in the parts where last time I had done terribly. I made Ribby and Croaks my b****s. And it was this amazing experience of feeling like I'm good at video games, which I'm not. And it's this feeling, this state in video games, that I have nicknamed the dance. The dance is this state you get into, about 30 deaths into a boss fight where something just clicks. And all of a sudden you're just in the flow. You can almost see your opponent's attacks coming, feel out even before the animation plays what they're going to do, and match them at any opportunity. You aren't perfect, but you're doing it, and something just kind of hits. This enemy isn't a mountain, immune to being overcome. They're an equal, and you can take them. And it's not even limited to battles. For your first maybe hour of playing, you get caught off guard by every trap, every pitfall, every ambush. But then the dance begins to spread to the rest of the gameplay. You start to stop falling for the game's tricks. You start to almost be able to see around corners. And all of a sudden you realize, this is Dark Souls. And so, I want to end off this probably really long YouTube video by saying that no matter how bad you are at video games, how worthless you feel at them, you can and will get better at Dark Souls, and you will be able to beat it. And how it'll be all the more satisfying for having beat it with that higher level of difficulty and hardship to get through. Okay, fine. You want easy? Let's go easy. Pick Pyromancer to begin with. This gives you one of the magic types called Pyromancy that basically just lets you throw fireballs at bosses throughout most of the early game if they're too hard. Pick the Master Key because it lets you skip huge chunks of the game if you really want to. Immediately go to the Valley of Darkness, grab the Crimson Robes, they upgrade really quickly and easily super early on. Once you pass the Tauros Demon on the bridge with the giant red dragon, go down by the steps to the side of the bridge and pelt the dragon's tail with arrows and a bow you can buy from a merchant in the previous area until it falls off and you get the Drake Sword, which is a massively overpowered weapon for this point in the game. Max out your strength stat and use heavier weapons like axes since they're usually really good at staggering enemies, and you can effectively flatten most non-boss enemies. After the Tauros Demon, you can also start to summon people, which you should do often, since at best it makes fights drastically easier, and at worst the boss will be distracted and you can get some early hits in. And basically every boss has some method to cheat your way through them, so you can just look that up online. But if after all that you really get stuck, you can spend a humanity, the little numbers at the left of your health bar, which you can acquire just by killing a lot of enemies while grinding to kindle a bonfire, which will double the amount of Estus healing flasks you get whenever you rest at this fire. Boom! I swear to you, this makes the game about 70% easier. And while I think you lose a little bit by lowering the difficulty in this way, it is still a legitimate way to enjoy this game, and don't let anyone tell you differently! So in conclusion, Dark Souls is an exceptional and powerful experience in video games, and I think anyone owes it to themselves to try the game. And I think that its difficulty, or at least how its difficulty has been discussed, has turned a lot of people away from the game. And that sucks. So take this as an olive branch, an open hand. Welcome to Lordran, where our Estus is smoky and our gods are crispy. That's it.